The promise of care can come from the most unlikely hands when loneliness becomes too heavy to carry alone. Thomas Mitchell had been riding for 3 days through the Arizona desert when he spotted smoke rising from the chimney of his old farmhouse. The property had been abandoned for 2 years, since he decided to leave in search of work in the silver mines of Colorado. The dry wind carried the familiar aroma of burning wood, but also something else, the smell of bread being baked and soaked on the fire. Their mount, a chestnut mare named Belle, slowed their pace as they approached the wooden fence that enclosed the ground. The planks were more weathered, some loose on the posts, but the property retained an appearance that Thomas did not immediately recognize. There were signs of care in every detail. The vegetable garden next to the house showed neat rows of corn, beans, and squash growing under the scorching sun. Thomas slowly dismounted, his sore muscles protesting after the long ride. He tied Belle to the post near the water fountain, noticing that someone had repaired the water pump he had left broken. The mechanism worked perfectly, pumping fresh water into the wooden trough that had also been repaired and varnished. Through the windows of the house, shadows moved inside, accompanied by the muffled sound of domestic activity. Cymbals clinked softly, heavy footsteps echoed on the wooden floor. Female voices murmured in low tones. Thomas watched for a moment, trying to process the strange feeling of finding life in a place he had left dead. As he approached the main door, the sounds abruptly ceased. Footsteps headed toward him, and the door opened before he could even knock. The woman who appeared at the entrance was impressive in every way. She was at least 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders and strong arms that spoke of years of hard work. Her blonde hair was tied in a simple bun, and her blue eyes studied Thomas with a mixture of anticipation and relief. 2 other women emerged from the dim light of the countryside, equally tall and robust. The resemblance in facial features revealed that they were sisters, one with dark brown hair braided over her shoulder, the third sporting red curls that glistened in the light coming in through the door. They all carried the same confident posture, the same way of moving that suggested strength and determination. The eldest, the blonde, made a welcome gesture with her calloused hand. It was Margaret, as Thomas would discover, and her sisters Catherine and Rose. They had arrived from the north a few months earlier, 3 women alone in the world looking for a place to start over. When they found the property abandoned but still solid, they decided it would be their second chance at life. The interior of the house was completely transformed. The furniture Thomas had left covered in sheets now glistened with fresh wax. The wooden floor reflected the light from the clean windows, adorned with new curtains made of simple but well-sewn fabric. The aroma of stew hung in the air, mixed with the subtle scent of wildflowers in a vase on the table. Thomas observed every detail as he walked through the house he barely recognized. His clothes were washed and folded in the closet in the master bedroom. Tools he had left rusty were now clean and organized in the barn. Even the back fence had been repaired, with new planks replacing those that time had rotted. Catherine, the brown-haired one, emerged from the kitchen bringing a steaming bowl of stew and a thick slice of homemade bread. His movements were efficient and graceful, revealing years of practice in household chores. He placed everything on the table, along with a glass of fresh water taken from the well that they had unclogged and cleaned. While Thomas ate, the 3 sisters quietly busied themselves with their activities. Margaret checked the wood piled up next to the fireplace. Rose examined the plants in the vegetable garden through the kitchen window. Catherine arranged dishes on a shelf that didn't exist when Thomas left. There was a natural harmony in their movements, as if they were pieces of a well-adjusted mechanism. The stew was delicious. Tender meat cooked with vegetables from the garden and spices that made every spoonful feel like a warm embrace. Thomas didn't realize how hungry he was until he started eating. The hunger of the road and the surprise of finding his home, transformed into a real home, created a strange feeling in his chest. When he finished his meal, Thomas leaned back in his chair and studied the women who had made his abandoned property something special. Margaret then approached, her large but careful hands resting on the back of a chair. Her blue eyes met his with an intensity that spoke of determination and hope mixed. Their proposal was simple. They were experienced workers. Catherine mastered cooking and sewing. Rose knew vegetable gardens and small animal husbandry. Margaret knew carpentry and general repairs. The farm had untapped potential, but it needed more hands to thrive. In exchange for a roof and food, they offered their skills and total dedication to the property. Rose joined the conversation, her red curls swaying as she gestured toward the fields that stretched to the horizon. Catherine remained in the kitchen, but Thomas could feel her attention focused on every word. There was something about these three women that inspired confidence. Maybe it was the way they took care of the details without expecting recognition, or how they had transformed an abandoned place into something welcoming. The vulnerability carefully hidden in their faces did not go unnoticed by Thomas. He knew this feeling of betting everything on an opportunity, having lived through similar situations throughout his life in the West. There was a raw honesty in the way they watched him, waiting for an answer that would determine their fate. Margaret then uttered the words that would echo in Thomas's mind for the next few days. They promised that they would take care of him in the same way they had taken care of the house during his absence. The sincerity in her voice carried the weight of a sacred promise, sealed not by contracts or laws, but by the words of three women who had nothing but each other and the hope of a new beginning. The decision came naturally, like the sunrise after a long night. Thomas stood up and held out his hand to Margaret, feeling the firmness of the grip that sealed an agreement based on mutual trust. For the first time in years, as he watched the three sisters smile with genuine relief, his home truly felt like a real home. The first few days revealed the true nature of the deal Thomas had accepted. The three sisters worked with an efficiency that bordered on the supernatural, as if each knew exactly what the others were doing without needing words. Before dawn, Margaret was already in the barn repairing the back fence that had given way during a recent storm. The rhythmic sound of hammer against wood echoed through the still dormant valley. Catherine took over the kitchen as if she had been born in that environment. His large hands manipulated knives and pans with surprising delicacy, creating meals that made Thomas wonder how he had survived so long by eating his own culinary attempts. The bread she baked 3 times a week filled the house with an aroma that reminded him of childhood memories he thought he had lost forever. Rose transformed the abandoned garden into something that seemed like something out of a dream. His hands removed weeds with surgical precision. His eyes identified pests before they even caused actual damage to plants. She would talk quietly to the vegetables as she worked, a constant murmur that Thomas sometimes picked up when the wind blew in the right direction. The plants responded to his care by growing more vigorous than he had ever been able to do. The farm's routine settled naturally. Thomas awoke to the sound of Margaret's heavy footsteps already in motion, preparing for another day of hard work. Breakfast was always ready when he came downstairs. Fresh chicken eggs Rose had gotten from a distant neighbor, bacon smoked on the farm itself, warm bread with homemade butter that Catherine prepared in a small adapted barrel. During the day, Thomas busied himself with the heaviest work, repairing distant fences, tending the few cattle he still owned, checking the boundaries of the property. But whenever she returned, she found evidence of the steady progress of the three women. A freshly painted wall, a hole in the roof that had been repaired, washed bedding scented with wild lavender that Rose grew near the house. What impressed Thomas most was the way the sisters anticipated his needs. When he came home with muddy boots, he would find warm water and a clean towel on the back porch. When her work clothes became torn, Margaret would repair them overnight, reinforcing the most vulnerable spots with barely invisible patches. When he coughed due to the desert dust, Catherine would brew an herbal tea that soothed his sore throat. There were times when Thomas found himself watching the three women work, fascinated by the perfect timing of their movements. Margaret was lifting a heavy board, just as Catherine approached with the necessary nails. Rose was picking vegetables from the garden, just when Catherine needed them for lunch. It was as if they shared a collective consciousness, a mutual understanding forged by years of dependence on each other. The nights were the most revealing moments. After dinner, the 4 people gathered in the main room, where Margaret had built a new bookcase for the few books Thomas had. Catherine sewed by the light of a lamp, her nimble fingers creating new clothes or repairing old ones. Rose organized seeds for the next season's planting, separating them into small fabric bags labeled with her careful handwriting. Thomas spent these moments reading or simply watching the fire crackle in the fireplace that Margaret had cleaned and repaired. Occasionally, one of the sisters would look up from his work and watch him with an expression he couldn't fully decipher. There was gratitude there, certainly, but also something deeper, a satisfaction that came from finding purpose after a long time adrift. It was during one of these silent nights that Thomas began to notice the minor details about his companions. Margaret had a small scar at the base of her right thumb, the result of an accident with a poorly sharpened tool. Catherine murmured melodies under her breath as she sewed, songs that seemed to come from a simpler time. Rose had a habit of lightly touching the plants when she passed them, as if she were checking on their well-being through touch. The property's transformation accelerated as the weeks passed. What was once an abandoned and melancholic farm now teemed with productive activity. Rose's garden expanded to include medicinal herbs and flowers that attracted wild bees. Margaret built a new fence for an enlarged chicken coop, allowing Catherine to raise more birds for eggs and eventual consumption. Even the animals seemed to respond to the new energy of the place. The cows produced more milk. The horses were more docile and cooperative. Thomas found himself working harder than he had in years, but strangely, he didn't feel fatigue in the same way. There was purpose in every hammer he lifted, meaning in every fence he repaired. The farm was no longer just his property. It had become a collective project, a shared creation that reflected the combined efforts of 4 people determined to build something lasting. The local community began to take notice of the transformation. Distant neighbors who rarely visited the property during the years of neglect now appeared more often, attracted by the constant smoke from the chimney and the evident signs of renewed prosperity. Some came to Rose for advice on pests in the vegetable garden. Others wanted to hire Margaret for small carpentry jobs on their own estates. Catherine became especially popular with the women of the area when she started selling her breads and preserves in the small market in the nearest town. Her skilled hands created products of a higher quality than what was available locally, and soon there was a constant demand for everything she produced. The extra income allowed for further improvements on the farm, new tools, better seeds, small luxuries that made life more comfortable. But it was one autumn morning, when Thomas found Margaret repairing a gate that he hadn't even noticed was broken, that he truly understood the extent of the care the 3 sisters had brought into his life. She worked with full concentration, her large hands moving with delicate precision as she adjusted the hinges. The morning sun created a golden halo around her figure, and for a moment Thomas saw in her not only a competent worker, but a devoted guardian of something precious. The realization came like a hot wave in his chest. The 3 women weren't just tending to their property, they were tending to it in a way that went far beyond physical labor. Every meal lovingly prepared, every outfit mended overnight, every quiet improvement in the house was a tangible manifestation of the promise they had made on the first day. They really cared for him, and the farm had become not just a place to work, but a real home where he was finally not alone. Winter arrived earlier that year, bringing with it biting winds that whistled through the arid valleys of Arizona. Thomas watched the first dark clouds gather on the horizon as he finished trimming the property's north fence. The cold poured through his leather jacket, reminding him that even in the desert, winter could be unforgiving for those who didn't prepare properly. When she returned home that afternoon, she found the 3 sisters in full activity preparing for the cold season. Margaret had spent the whole morning sealing cracks in the walls and checking the integrity of the roof. His hard-working hands applied a homemade mixture of clay and straw to every opening through which the wind could penetrate. Catherine organized preserves and dry foods she had prepared during the fall, carefully calculating the quantities needed to sustain 4 people through the most difficult months. Rose had turned part of the barn into a warm shelter for the chickens and other smaller animals. Their delicate but firm hands built cozy nests using hay and old cloths, ensuring that egg production continued even during the coldest nights. The care with which he treated each animal revealed a deep understanding of the needs of all living creatures under his protection. The first snowfalls arrived in the second week of December, covering the barren landscape with a white blanket that completely transformed the familiar appearance of the farm. Thomas awoke one morning to find the outside world silent and motionless, as if nature itself had decided to take a break. Through the icy window, he could see Margaret already on the move, breaking the ice that had formed in the animal's watering trough during the night. The isolation, forced by winter, revealed aspects of the 3 sisters that Thomas had not yet fully observed. During the long nights around the fireplace, Margaret displayed an astonishing ability to tell stories. Their narratives about life in Colorado, about the hardships they faced after losing their parents, were told in a deep voice that mesmerized Thomas. She spoke of snow-capped mountains, of nights so cold the air burned their lungs, of entire communities coming together to survive the brutal winters. Catherine revealed an unexpected musical talent during these intimate nights. Her large hands, usually occupied with practical work, played a small harmonica that she had kept since childhood. The melodies he created were simple but deeply emotional, filling the house with sounds that seemed to come straight from the heart. Thomas found himself eagerly awaiting these musical moments, which transformed the common room into a sacred space of shared beauty. Rose showed herself to be a natural observer of the world around her. During her morning walks to check on the animals, she pointed out details that Thomas had never noticed: the way certain plants curved before storms, the patterns birds made in the sky when they sought shelter, the subtle changes in the color of the snow that indicated temperature variations. Her connection to natural rhythms was so intense that she often predicted changes in the weather days in advance. It was during a particularly severe blizzard that Thomas fell ill. What started as a simple cold quickly turned into something more serious, leaving him bedridden with a high fever and persistent cough. The three sisters took turns taking turns to care for him, each bringing their own healing abilities to the recovery process. Margaret prepared hot and cold compresses as needed, her strong but gentle hands adjusting blankets and pillows to maximize her comfort. Catherine created a series of medicinal soups and teas that gradually restored her strength. Her recipes combined practical ingredients with herbs that Rose had collected and dried during the fall. The care with which she prepared each meal, testing temperature and seasoning multiple times before serving, demonstrated a dedication that went far beyond simple duty. Rose maintained a steady supply of fresh air in the room, opening and closing windows at precise intervals to maintain circulation without causing additional cooling. During the worst days of the disease, Thomas floated in a semi-conscious state where reality and dreams mixed in a confusing way. But through the haze of fever, one constant remained clear. There was always a careful presence in the room, a cool hand on his forehead, a low voice muttering words of encouragement. The three sisters alternated, but never left him completely alone. The recovery was slow but steady. As his mind cleared, Thomas began to realize the full extent of the care he had received. His clothes were clean and dry, changed regularly, even when he was unaware of the process. Medicine appeared punctually at his bedside, along with fresh water and small snacks designed to whet his appetite. The room was always at the ideal temperature, warm enough for comfort but not stuffy. When he was finally able to get up and walk around the house, Thomas found that the sisters had taken on all their responsibilities without hesitation. Margaret had taken care of the larger animals and kept the farm structures running smoothly. Catherine had managed food and fuel supplies with impressive efficiency. Rose had constantly monitored weather conditions and made preventative decisions to protect the most vulnerable plants and animals. Even more impressive was the fact that they had done all this while maintaining their constant care for him. No task had been neglected, no detail forgotten. The farm will continue to operate as a perfect mechanism, even with its main responsible person incapacitated. The realization hit Thomas with unexpected emotional force. These three women had not only cared for him during his vulnerability, but had completely taken on the weight of his responsibilities without complaint or expectation of recognition. The first morning, he felt strong enough to leave the house. Thomas found Margaret repairing a makeshift sleigh she had built to haul hay through deep snow. His hands had worked with the same tireless dedication that he had observed from day one, but he now understood that this dedication extended to him personally in a way that went far beyond any working arrangement. Rose appeared from the barn, carrying fresh eggs and a warm smile that lit up her face when she saw him standing and recovered. Catherine emerged from the kitchen with a bowl of warm, cinnamon-spiced porridge, prepared specifically to aid in her full recovery. The three women surrounded him with affectionate but discreet attention, checking on his well-being without making him feel disabled. At that moment, standing on the porch of his home as he watched the snow-covered landscape glow in the morning sun, Thomas fully understood the promise the sisters had made months earlier. They really took care of him, not just of his practical needs, but of his complete well-being as a human being. The farm had become more than shared ownership. It was a home where four people had learned to function as a chosen family, united not by blood, but by mutual care and common purpose. Spring arrived with warm winds that melted the last vestiges of snow, revealing a renewed land ready for a new cycle of growth. Thomas watched the first wildflowers bloom in the fields near the house, small dots of color that contrasted with the barren wilderness. It was the beginning of her second full year living with her three sisters, and the transformation she had witnessed on her estate seemed to be reflected in her very soul. Margaret began construction of an addition to the main house, 2 small but comfortable bedrooms that would allow more privacy for everyone. His skilled hands measured and cut wood with precision, creating solid structures that would withstand desert winds and the occasional storm. The project had come naturally, a need recognized without words but understood by all. Rose dramatically expanded the garden, adding rows of vegetables that they could sell at the town market. Her plants grew with impressive vigor, as if responding to the love and attention she devoted to each seed planted. Catherine set out to raise a small herd of goats, hardy animals that would thrive in the arid climate and provide additional milk for the production of artisanal cheeses. The prosperity of the farm attracted the attention of traveling merchants and even some families looking for land to establish their own estates. Thomas found himself in the unusual position of being consulted as an expert in desert farming, when in fact he knew that all the success was due entirely to the skills and dedication of the 3 women who had turned his abandoned property into a model of rural productivity. During the hottest summer months, when work intensified and hours seemed to stretch indefinitely under the scorching sun, Thomas observed how the sisters maintained not only their efficiency, but also their constant concern for their well-being. Catherine always made sure he had fresh water available during the heavy lifting. Rose created small areas of shadow, strategically placed in the places where he spent the most time. Margaret adjusted the strenuous work schedules to the cooler hours of dawn and dusk. It was during a particularly warm August night that Thomas finally understood the unique nature of what he had found. Sitting on the porch after a long day's work, watching the 3 sisters move around the property on their afternoon chores, he realized that he had discovered something more valuable than any buried treasure or vein of gold. He had found a true home, built not on empty promises or legal contracts, but on genuine care and shared purpose. Margaret approached that night, her heavy boots echoing softly on the wooden floor of the porch. She sat next to him on the bench she had built specifically for these moments of quiet contemplation. Her blue eyes looked out over the same landscape he admired, but Thomas knew she saw different things: upcoming improvements, projects yet to be accomplished, ways to make the property even more productive and welcoming. Catherine emerged from the kitchen with glasses of chilled lemonade, made with lemons from a tree that Rose had managed to make thrive against all the expectations of the local climate. She poured each one with the same careful attention that she put into all of her tasks, ensuring that each glass was at the perfect temperature and with the ideal amount of sugar. Rose joined the group after checking one last time on the animals for the night. Her hands still carried the scent of lavender and other herbs she grew near the house, creating a natural scent that made even the hottest desert nights something special and memorable. In that quiet moment, with the 4 people gathered on the porch watching the stars begin to appear in the darkened sky, Thomas felt a deep peace he hadn't experienced in decades. The promises the 3 sisters had made that first day were not just words. They had become tangible reality, manifested in every improved aspect of their life and property. The farm was thriving, but more importantly, Thomas had rediscovered what it meant to belong to a place and a family. Not a blood family, but something perhaps stronger. People who had deliberately chosen to care for each other, who had turned a working arrangement into something sacred and lasting. When they finally got up to enter the house, preparing for another night of well-deserved rest, Thomas looked one last time at the property that the 4 people had built together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, more work, other opportunities for growth and improvement. But tonight, for the first time in many years, Thomas Mitchell slept with the absolute assurance that he was not alone in the world, and that life's most important promises are those kept not out of obligation, but out of genuine love and mutual care. If this story has touched your heart, and you want more exciting Wild West narratives, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your favorite adventures are waiting for you in our library of Wild West stories. Activate the bell so you don't miss any of the upcoming journeys that we have prepared, especially for you.